The Now up to this point, and you didn't go to law school with the idea this was access to politics or a political career. That was not on your agenda.
I just knew that a law degree would offer me an opportunity to help people. When I was growing up, we didn't have a television in our home until I think I was a sophomore or junior in high school. I mean, our entertainment growing up was listening to the radio. When I'm saying our, I'm talking about my dad, mom, and I. I'm the only child. Couldn't afford anybody but me. But we listened to The Shadow and the Green Hornet, all the shows that we just enjoyed listening to. And when we got a television, in Cassopolis, we could pick up the South Bend stations. We could pick up one or two Chicago stations and WKZO in Kalamazoo, which was, I think, Channel 3 at the time. And as I was able to watch television, I remember watching on the news this thing called civil rights movement and the marches and the like. I graduated from high school in 1959. I didn't know the significance of it. I just knew that Brown versus the Board of Education was passed by a unanimous Supreme Court in 1954. I didn't follow or know enough about the 1955 decision where the court was entertaining arguments from the lawyers as to how quickly they should implement their 1954 ruling. Of course, they came out with all deliberate speed. Many of us thought that means it was going to be very quick, only it turned out to be very slow, and that was the intent of that decision. And in 1955, I knew that there was a woman who would not get up out of her seat on a bus, and that Rosa Parks was that person. And the civil rights or the bus boycott movement was led by a new minister in town, having been chosen by E.B. Nixon, by the name of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And I think at the time it was just Reverend Martin Luther King, and he picked up his doctorate later. Those vague kinds of things, and remembering the Edmund Pettus Bridge and things like that, but it didn't dawn on me in terms of what the power and majesty of a lawyer or lawyers could do to help change society until I was well into law school. And I taught during the day, and I went to law school at night. And so as opposed to graduating in 3 years, if you go full-time, I graduated in 4 years. And we had a significant number of black law students who were all attending the Detroit College of Law. There were only maybe one or two that were going during the day. Most all of us went at night. And like me, a number were teachers, some were probation officers, some worked in other jobs, but we went to law school at night. And it wasn't until being in law school that I began to have an appreciation for what lawyers can do. I was in law school. The first legal job I had was at the law firm of Keith, Conyers, Brown, Baltimore, and Anderson. The Keith was Damon Keith, and the Conyers was Nathan Conyers, Mike Walls, and Joe Brown, and Herman Anderson, and Joe Baltimore. And that was the summer of 1967. I'd just gotten married on June 17th, and my father-in-law, I went by to pick him up. We went to go play golf, as we would do a lot together. And when we came back, we saw a lot of smoke. Couldn't figure out what the heck was going on. And it was near his house because they lived at, I think, 1642 Longfellow. And so I dropped him off, still couldn't figure out what was going on. Got in the car and drove downtown. My wife and I were living in a Central Park Plaza apartments down here just off of Lafayette, between Lafayette and Larned. And got home and found out that there was a riot in place, that it started as a result of the police going in to break up a blind pig, or after hours joint, however you wish to call it. And it was a much larger crowd than they thought. And then they had to call a couple paddy wagons, etc. And then it just erupted. I say all that to suggest that as a result, there were literally thousands of people over the course of several days who were put behind a fence, I think out on Belle Isle. I never went to see it, but I knew that it was someplace, and I think it was on Belle Isle. And the judges called out for all lawyers to please come in and be of help, because people were being detained, and lawyers could, whether you had a practice in criminal law or not, lawyers were trained enough to be able to cause a person to be taken before a judge and being advised what they're charged with, asking for bond, and many people were dismissed or not, or there was no one there to make a charge, so case dismissed. Some were charged with disorderly person or whatever they might have been charged with. Well, the Keith Law Firm, because of their experiences, were knee-deep in it. And I saw them render service for people who needed help, who couldn't speak for themselves. It made a very big impression upon me. And then a summer or so later, Don Campbell, who taught contracts at Detroit College of Law, asked me to come up to his office, and he said that Detroit College of Law had been contacted and by Ford Motor Company, the Office of General Counsel. And Ford Motor Company wanted to let it be known or make a statement that they were open to everybody who wanted to come in to be a lawyer for Ford Motor Company, and as a result wanted to make sure that they had some law students of color. And
Remind me of the year we're talking about.
That would either be 68 or 69. I think it was, well,
just prior to your
I graduated in January of 70. So I went there and was there for a summer. Fabulous opportunity. I learned a lot. D. Allen Glenn from the University of Michigan was another person of color who worked there for the summer. And he helped me with my writing skills because I just needed the help, and he was kind enough to do that. And when he first started, all I saw was red on the paper, and when we finished, hardly any red on the paper. And then when I graduated in 1970, just before I graduated, I sent a letter in to a very large law firm, and I asked for an opportunity to be interviewed. And I went, before I went to Martindale Hubble to find out who this person was that was going to be interviewing me and the like, and I went in to see him. And he indicated that he thanked me for coming in, but wanted me to know that the law firm did not hire law students from the Detroit College of Law. I said, thank you very much. all of which I found to be interesting because he graduated from the Detroit College of Law. But as I reflected upon it and asked around a little bit more, I found that when I graduated in 1970, I don't think there was a large law firm in the city of Detroit, if not the state, that had a person of color as an associate or as a partner. So I joined the law firm of Gregg and Gardner, Sam Gardner and Bobby Gregg, and both of which went on to become judges. Sam Gardner, I ran his campaign for Detroit Recorder's Court.
Was that your first campaign in?
No, get to that in a half second. And then the other I helped was J. Robert Gregg was appointed to probate court by the governor. But my first initiation into politics came when my father-in-law and I were playing golf. We were playing at Palmer Park, and happened to run into Harry Philo. Before that, I'd heard a lot about Robert Millender because he, like my father, was in the Army, and they served in Italy. And my father-in-law was very impressed with Robert Millender. Robert Millender was in the only integrated law firm at that time, at least that I knew of. And so I wanted to see if I could impress him. And with the fact that if I were willing to work hard in a campaign, he might translate that into I might be willing to work hard in a law firm, and thus I might have a job after I finished. So in the summer of 1969, I began to work as a volunteer. Because I lived downtown, I think the office was not too far from Lafayette Park. And I began doing everything that I was asked to do. At the time, we had mimeograph machines, and we would have flyers, 8 by 11, that talked about our candidate, Richard Austin, and we would go out to shopping centers and other places and stick them under windshields, etc. And then,
was that Austin's first race?
That's Austin's first race for mayor. At the time, he was CPA, and that was in 1969.
Okay.
And so we worked hard on the campaign, and I graduated to being head of the advance team. And I would go, as you know, ahead of the candidate, and when the candidate, Richard Austin, would come, I would tell him how many people were in the room. If there was somebody giving other candidates a hard time or somebody, I'd tell them where that person was situated and the like, and then I left and go to the next place. We watched the election returns in what is now the Book Cadillac downtown. And it was raining, it was cold, and we lost a very close election to Roman Gribbs, who at the time was a sheriff.
Yes, he had been sheriff, or was sheriff at that time, running from that position.
And he was successful. Right after that election, of course, I did not get the job with Bob Millender's law firm, but the next year, Bob Millender called and said, and I was working for Gregg and Gardner, and also left Gregg and Gardner after about 6 months, and the four of us, Elliott Hall, Horace Stone, Alex Allen, and myself, started our own law firm. So the four associates left, the two partners started our own law firm. And then Bob called and said, Dennis, I've got some challenges with my circulation in my leg. We've got a Democratic convention, state Democratic convention in Grand Rapids. It was at the Pentland. And I'd like for you to go up and be my eyes and ears, and I want you to walk and be around Richard Austin. I want you to report into me every day, which I did, because you might remember Secretary of State O'Hare had decided he was not going to run again. And so Bob wisely thought that if Richard Austin could get the nomination, he could win and become Secretary of State, which was a